Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of DTV. We are live here at DevOps World, formerly known as Jenkins World. We're going to take some time on the floor and interview some of the exhibitors that are here today at the center of the world of DevOps, from security to development and so on. So we look forward to having you all join us. Okay guys, now we are here and we're talking to Dan Garfield, who is the Chief Technology Evangelist at Codefresh. Welcome to DTV, Dan.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So Dan, can you tell us a little bit about Codefresh and what you're evangelizing?
Yeah, so Codefresh is a CI/CD platform designed for sort of cloud-native technologies like Kubernetes, Helm, Istio, Docker, and we've really reinvented the whole process of CI/CD to be designed around that experience. And so we have hundreds of built-in steps for dealing with common issues like building a Docker image. We can do that just about faster than anybody. We have advanced deployment steps, so if you want to do a blue-green or a canary release on Kubernetes or with Helm, we can do that very easily. We have a whole dashboard so you can see what's currently running and where it came from. So we actually really tried to kind of take a holistic approach to solving all of the problems around DevOps in a CI/CD solution.
Right. And when it comes to CI/CD in general, would you say that it's reached the mainstream today when it comes to application development and delivery at this juncture?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because actually, while it's certainly mainstream, it's also when we talk about who our competitors are, I still believe that our number one competitor is nothing. That most people still haven't done CI/CD. Even when we're in the Bay, we're based out of the Bay Area, so we feel like, oh, everybody does CI/CD, everybody uses Kubernetes, everybody uses this, because we sort of live in the future a little bit, and you go outside and realize, well, actually, most teams haven't really nailed down a CI, let alone a CD process. Very few teams have got a CD process going. Everybody believes that they should have it. Very few people do have it. So one of the goals for us with Codefresh is to make something that's so easy, so intuitive, so easy to maintain, so easy to pick up, that we can break into this larger group of people to say, you know what, if something's been keeping you from getting this done, it really shouldn't. It's a lot easier than you think, especially because the tooling has come really, really far.
Right, absolutely. And another area is containers. I think over the past, recently, we've really been seeing an upswing in containers. Is that going to be continuing, or can you shed some light on sort of the hype versus the reality?
Sure, yeah. So I think you'll definitely see containers continue in a much stronger way. They're here to stay. And the advantages of using containers over just using a VM, and of course, when you're using a container, you're usually using a VM underneath as well. So it's not like the VMs have totally disappeared, but from a user standpoint, to be able to work with an image that contains everything you need to run, and it's 100 megs, huge advantages for doing that. So it's definitely going to pick up and continue. What I think will be more interesting is, originally when containers started to come onto the scene, people on the infrastructure side were excited about it, but the end sort of engineers weren't necessarily dealing with them. I think that's gonna shift a little bit, so that engineers are a little bit more involved in the containers, running them locally and those kinds of things. That's come a long way.
Right. And with DTV, we're primarily focused on helping our audience understand digital transformation, and that's a term that's been very widely used. So we like to have industry experts, technology experts such as yourself, impart their interpretation of what digital transformation is, maybe how they define it as an expert, or what they're seeing that to mean for their customers in the industries that they're in. So what would your definition be of digital transformation today? Why is it so big?
Well, it's funny, because when we talk about transformation, I think a lot about the transmission, the transition from like virtual machines to containers. Those are both digital technologies, of course, but really we're talking about modernization. And modernization can mean moving from technology that was mainstream 8 years ago, or even 4 years ago. So when I think about digital transformation, I think a lot about how digital transformation is really a continuous process where you're always consuming the new, better technology and getting the benefit out of it as soon as possible. And I think the companies that have the biggest advantage are the ones who are better at consuming newer technologies faster. And I don't know if this isn't quite to your question, but it made me think of this. I think one of the most exciting technologies right now for digital transformation is istio. I don't know if you're familiar with istio, but istio is a service mesh networking tool that basically sits on top of Kubernetes. And the reason it's really critical is because if you're working with a big legacy infrastructure and you're starting to containerize, istio can make a service mesh that includes your legacy stuff in your cluster. And so that means as you take off a component and containerize it, it can continue to talk to all the old infrastructure as if it were native to Kubernetes. And I think it's going to be a really, really critical technology for companies who are doing the transition to containers.
Right, absolutely. And InfoStretch, I don't know, how much you know about us, but we are focused heavily on DevOps development and also testing, which sometimes it gets forgotten and now is sort of seen as part of DevOps. Do you have any perspective on where that's going? We see manual becoming a thing of the past. We see automation and AI, make automation in particular, and maybe now AI taking a much bigger role when it comes to testing. What have you seen or observed there, if at all, based on what your clients are doing?
Yeah, so I think the big shift that I'm seeing there is the teams that used to do this really well were really good at building lots of scripts.
Right.
That's going away because there are so many tools that you can grab off the shelf that are going to do a better job than you investing a lot of time and money to script something and then maintain it. And that's like half of our value prop, right? For Codefresh is we're like, stop building a pile of scripts. You don't want to do that. Grab this stuff off the shelf. You're going to be a lot faster. And when you're writing code, there's a certain amount of time that you have to spend, writing tests and validation, but you can cut down on it pretty dramatically with some of the tooling that's out there. So I think that's where I see a big advantage is that the teams who decide, you know what, we don't have to build all this ourselves, they're going to be the ones that move along faster because your key innovation isn't that you're good at writing scripts, whatever company you're at, right? Netflix's key innovation is that they deliver really great video, really great applications. They're really good engineering because their engineers are productive. That's not because necessarily that they're the best at writing scripts. Maybe they grab tools off the shelf. Maybe they let the open source community maintain stuff. But ultimately, they move faster because that's there.
Hi, everybody. We are continuing our day with Brian Murphy, the Senior VP of Sales and Business Development with NowSecure. Welcome to DTV, Brian.
Thanks, Leila.
Great. So, Brian, we're going to be talking a little bit about the importance of security when it comes to DevOps today. So can you start by telling us a little bit about what NowSecure does?
Sure. We're focused on helping secure mobile apps in the development process, so integrating into the DevOps process. So when you talk about DevSecOps, we're the sec component of that. And what our aim is really to help organizations not just move with the speed of ideas, but move with the speed of ideas in a secure way. The worst thing that can happen is you have a great idea, you put it out there on a mobile app, which can happen very quickly, and end up on the front cover of CNN.
Right, absolutely. And we've been hearing the term DevSecOps. I mean, we're all familiar with DevOps, and now security has clearly become a big initiative. So can you help us understand why it's now more front and center than before? We talk a little bit on DTV about digital transformation. So why now is DevSecOps becoming a big part of the digital transformation initiative?
Sure. Well, I think that when DevOps was started was really to try to improve the process internally to be able to support an agile process and not just build the app, but make sure it can get to production efficiently and quickly. And obviously, with the greater risk profile of a lot of these apps and concerns over privacy, what was happening was that the folks that created DevOps, John Willis told this story the other day at an event, and he said, we were all excited, giving each other chest bumps, and we looked there was somebody in the corner with a hood on, and they said, "Who's that guy?" And said, "That's a security guy." And John said, "Whoa, how could we have forgotten about security?" Security has to be part of the process. Right. And what happened is that if we can build an app very quickly, we already are doing testing for functional defects. A security vulnerability is another type of defect. So if we can use the same patterns that we use for functional defect detection in the DevOps process, can't we do the same thing for security? And that's really what the DevSecOps is all about, is to try to enable the process with security so it's just built into the process and it's not an afterthought.
Right. And just out of curiosity, is any part of that process automated these days, or is it mostly manual?
If you think about the cycle time that you have in a DevOps process, you have to be able to introduce automation. The state of the art before NowSecure was manual pen testing of mobile applications, and that takes quite some time to do. It could take anybody, an individual 2 to 4 weeks to get through that. Obviously, that doesn't work in between builds with rapid, continuous deployment. That doesn't work. So we've been able to figure out how to do a pen test in an automated fashion that completes in 7 to 15 minutes, which, we continue to optimize that to try to reduce that time, but that fits inside that CI/CD kind of environment.
Right. And are there any particular industries or market segments that are more vulnerable when it comes to security? Is it the regulations or things like that might be the case in your experience?
Sure. I think that the great thing about mobile apps is that they can be built very quickly. What we find is that large brand companies, what happens is that even though they have a centralized process and procedure, that a marketing person in a remote location can go ahead and build a mobile app and put it out for a particular event. The problem is that if that mobile app doesn't go through the standard security process, you've just exposed risk. Right. So we see a lot of big brand companies that they have many, many apps, hundreds, thousands of apps, and they may be introducing risk because they can't go through the process. If we can work it into a process where they're testing while they're developing, that's a much better thing to do from a security perspective. Clearly, any highly regulated organizations that really have to protect privacy, with the advent of GDPR, this is also really important to have automated privacy testing, another form of security testing, I guess you could say. Yeah. That's also critical. Yeah. So highly regulated, financial service, government, these are areas that pay particular attention, or in big brand companies.
Exactly. And just to kind of close this out, what would be a few things, maybe the top 3 things or tips that you would give to these types of organizations that are seeking to, establish a journey towards security in their DevOps processes?
Sure. I think if you're going to add security into your DevOps, which I think is an imperative, I would say it is an imperative. Yeah. You have to start with that first to make sure you get the buy-in, because again, this is a people and job functions and process and policy. So you have to everybody has to buy into this. Right. Whenever you change the process, there are people that had a prior process that now it's different. So you have to deal with that internal change management. Just like when you introduce DevOps, you have to do the same thing for DevSecOps. Yeah. Second, I think you have to have realistic expectations of what this is going to produce. The reality is that before you may have been able to get through a DevOps cycle very quickly and have an application out to production quickly, when you introduce the security step, initially you may slow things down a little bit because now you're finding vulnerabilities that you otherwise would have put into production environment. Right. So you have to be ready for that. And then I think where I think is most important, of course, because we're a partner in this model, is you have to find good partners that are building solutions that are automated, that allow scale, that do not impact the developer, make it very easy for the developer to continue doing what they're doing while just making it part of the process. And it's just like the functional testing, it's now you happen to do security testing.
I have with me here Paul Bruce. He is a solutions architect at Neotys. Welcome to DTV, Paul.
Thank you.
Great. So Paul, Neotys, can you tell us briefly what you guys do?
Sure. We do performance testing We provide solutions to help people do their performance testing, to do it continuously, and also to make sure that there's feedback goes back to people who can actually fix the problems that they introduce in terms of scalability, reliability, and availability. So we make sure that people have the right tools that fit their cycles, that there's a clock speed match between the development and the testing to make sure that performance is baked in to the planning process and the staging process, and actually provide testing solutions that help people to do that at all sorts of organizations, big and small.
And so when it comes to testing in general, do you see that as becoming a part of the DevOps equation, or is it a separate thing? And also to that question, is testing now becoming a lot more automated in today's kind of digital world than it was in the past?
Sure. So you mentioned digital world, right? There's a lot of companies who are no longer brick and mortar. We still have brick and mortar all over the place. They also realize that I think IT, particularly development and software, it's not just eating the world, right? It's that it's no longer supportive. It's the way to have a business that's supported by traditional brick and mortar or whatever you do, right? So in the physical world. The digital part of this is, how do we do that better than everybody else? How do we differentiate? Sometimes it's not always better, it's just different. So how do two different brands compete at a digital level, right? As it turns out, that's usually mobile, web, but there's also a lot of back-end stuff, APIs. So with this landscape, right, with this urgency and this imperative to put software out there that actually has a huge impact on your revenue streams, that's what the digital is all about. The problem is it causes complexity. And so you've got these APIs, you've got back-end systems, you've got clusters and Kafka and all sorts of stuff in the back end that it's not automatically scalable, right? These things don't just, scalability doesn't come for free. Reliability takes a lot of hard work, right? The question is, how do you regularly prove that that's going to work? And so rather than leaving it to all the way at the end of a life cycle, which is what a lot of people used to do, like in the waterfall days, right? Plus Agile, plus DevOps. Now we're starting to get smaller in how we deliver more frequently. And that means that we have to provide feedback more frequently. So the feedback that, particularly in the performance space that you're looking for is what I've launched going to be able to handle the load that we're going to put on it? And so one of the things that I think is important about testing is it's just a tactic. Testing is just a tactic. What is your strategy? What is your approach? What is the goal? And so what we do is we work directly with customers, with a lot of partners, to make sure that those other elements of the notion of performance if you're going to go digital, performance is imperative. And so we make sure that the whole thing is thought through. We don't just sell tools. We provide solutions. We help customers right fit, right? We work with all sorts of folks, like I said, and we get to see a variety of appetites and maturities. And either way, ultimately at the end of the day, we provide technologies that can work up in the cloud, down on premise, mixture of both. You can have us do some of the, provide some of the services. We work with a lot of service partners to do so. We also have SaaS products, and we also have all of our software that you can run and spin on your own. You can do it yourself if you want to. So that's kind of how I would approach the question about testing in DevOps. I don't think DevOps is eating the world. It depends. It's a right fit. We have to be okay to say the world is not simple. We can't come at it simply. We need to think together and work together. And amongst other things, I think that's what DevOps brings to the table, is the need to quickly, efficiently, and to your point earlier, automation, right? Automate not everything. Automate what makes sense, what makes the most sense. There are some things you still need to manually check. But to rely on automated by default rather than to rely on manual by default.
Yeah, and there is no better way. You should use both. Is that the idea, or?
Again, it depends.
Yeah, it depends on the scenario.
Right. If we're talking about an organization that's been in the space for 50, 60 years, they're traditionally brick and mortar, and they're trying to get more automated, then they're going to have a lot of manual things that still need to stay manual until you get the enablers to make them not manual. That's what we're in the business of when it comes to performance, is to enable them to do automated when they see fit. And we help people migrate from these really old dinosaur crusty sort of solutions for load testing into something that is containerized. It can be spun up anywhere you want. It's not restrictive in terms of licensing compared to all the other solutions. And it fits into your landscape, not just now, what tools and processes you have now, but also in the future. We work with various technologies. We're really good friends with the Dynatrace team. We've got a bidirectional integration with them. We work with QA Symphony. We work with all sorts of partners technically to make sure that what you have in place also we can fit in there as well.
Right. And you mentioned earlier the capability to kind of record and save some of the tests that go on so that it can become a lot more intelligent, the next round. So is that a capability that's associated with your platform?
Yeah, what we're finding is that there's a lot of hype and, quite frankly, bullcrap in the AI space. Everybody wants to throw the keyword in, but there are...
Which is what I was going to throw in, but I prevented.
There are intelligent ways. You always have to ask yourself with a new technology, right? What does this do for me that the old technology didn't? And there's a lot of places where we're still seeing that people are just trying to bang the gong of artificial intelligence without really understanding, is there a proper use case for this? So one of the proper use cases that I think we're looking at is with our integrations with APM solutions, right? We're load testing. There's a market of APM solutions. We're friends with all of them, right? And there's insights and information that comes from either your production or your pre-production, but looking at the actual stack running your thing that can help to inform maybe your test coverage strategy. If you think about performance tests and you're just running these things that people thought were important, might not actually be what's really important in production. Things have changed. The code has slid to a different place. So we want that information, that context about what's actually happening in production or what's happening in from the functional side of things to be able to inform what you should bother with in terms of performance and prioritize. That goes back to that strategy, the approach. What is your approach, right? What is your ultimate goal? So in terms of how we work, there are some things that we're doing internally to figure out, what's the right fit for machine learning. It's a great concept, but just jumping into it without really having a strong use case, we usually like to make sure that what we build has direct impact on our customers. And so usually what I look for is, yes, but is there a customer who will deeply benefit from what we're doing, right? It's not just hype, it's reality. So we've got a couple of things right now. We're working on basically taking APM insights and being able to inform the test coverage as well as the test volume parts of our strategy. And we look forward to kind of working with other people to figure out what are the other use cases there as well.
Yep. And speaking of hype and reality, let's talk about containers. It seems to be a very popular thing today, as many of our clients are going in that direction. Is that something that you see becoming more prominent, especially in this sector?
Oh yeah, anything you can put in a container, put it in a container.
Okay. So clear.
For heaven's sake, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's let's take an example of, by default we have these web dashboards, and by default our R&D team prefers that you launch it as a set of Docker containers.
Right.
Why is that? Why do you think that is? Just because it's fun and hot? It's actually better to do that from a support, because you know cryptographically, right, that the contents of that container have not been changed. The deployment isn't just how easy it is to deploy, it's how easy it is to package it up and prove that what's running in production is something you can support. If it's just a bunch of random installers and you leave it to your IT team to implement a vendor solution, they can implement it in a million ways and it might run poorly. because of the operational problems in that particular situation. So the other thing is it just makes a lot of sense. I've been working with Docker for a while. I've just started getting into the kube stuff. I'm trying to do some examples on how you could spin up a controller and load generator on Neotys in a kube file pretty easily. I don't think that's hype. I think that's a reality that we've already seen for a while. I think there are clear cases where it's absolutely the way you should go. And then there's other cases where it's like, how do we fit this old service into a container world? There's no container mainframe. Like mainframes don't fit into containers necessarily. But that's where we see things like when people start to break up the monoliths, things like services that used to be deployed in a traditional way, they break them up. Now they got these individual microservices that they can start to containerize, which allows them to deploy that a lot faster because it's by default automated and verifiable. And that's what we try to do. We try to make what people do verifiable, particularly in the performance space. That's where we go.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, really.
Neotys, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning into this episode of DTV.